Hey, today has been on the calendar for a while, so I'm going to, without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and throw it to the dude who's bringing the word of the Lord to us today, Pastor E. And I want you to put your hands together, and I want you to welcome him to this stage. When he says something that God has placed on his heart, I want you to let him hear it, but also let God hear it. God bless you today. Rock it out, bro.
Hey, what's up, y'all? One person, thank you, yes. Listen, hey, before we get started, I just want to say thank you to Pastor Mark for the opportunity to, stand and share God's word with you. It's always an honor to be able to preach here at Epicenter, but it's a special honor today. That today's the day we're going to honor Pastor Mark and Kim for Pastor Appreciation in just a little while. So, the fact that you'd be willing to trust me today to share God's word is just a little extra. So thank you. And because that's coming up, and because I know what time it is, we're going to try and jump right into this thing. I'm not going to cut too many corners, but I'm going to try to be mindful of our time this morning. So if you would look at Matthew chapter 22, beginning in verse 15. There you go. Thank you. All right, good job. Here we go. Matthew chapter 22, beginning in verse 15, it says this. Then the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap him in his words, him being Jesus. They sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. Teacher, they said, we know you are a man of integrity, and you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are. Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, you hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax. They brought him a denarius, and he asked them, whose image is this and whose inscription? Caesar's, they replied. Then he said to them, so give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. When they heard this, they were amazed. So they left him and went away. The title of my message today is, you can call it a comeback, and we'll kind of talk about why that is throughout the message. But there's a lot going on in this passage, right? There's about 8 verses here. There's a lot going on. So much is going on. In fact, the first draft of this sermon included like 4 pages of history and context before we ever got to any application. But you don't have to worry, I threw that one away. All right, but we are going to still cover some of that history and context, but I want us to look at this narrative in a little bit of a different way this morning. But before we do even that, I want to ask you guys, how many of you have ever been the victim of a really great comeback, one that just leaves you speechless? Like you thought you said something cool, and then somebody just snapped right back at you, and you're like, ooh, I wish I could punch you right now. Yeah, how many of y'all have been like the perpetrator, and you're still proud of it? It was like 10 years ago. I should have known. You would have raised your hand, Chris. So I've been on both sides, right? The receiver and the person dishing it out. But I think probably the best one that's ever happened, that I've ever been a part of, happened when my son Liam was 5 years old. All right, and at that time, he loved the show Daniel Tiger. Can you show Daniel Tiger in case people aren't familiar? Daniel Tiger is a show on PBS. It's based on some of the puppets from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Liam, he even had a sweater very similar to this, and he's like, look, I'm Daniel Tiger. This was his dude, right? And so one day, we were getting ready for school. I think it was probably, I don't know if it was kindergarten or pre-K, also, it doesn't matter. We were getting ready for school, and he was drinking some milk. And I said, hey, hold that milk with 2 hands so you don't spill it. So, of course, he held the milk with 1 hand and spilled it. And so then we were probably running late, because we always are. And I was probably a little aggravated, a little frustrated. And he's like, Dad, are you mad? It's like, no, Liam, I'm not mad. I'm just frustrated. He's like, Daniel Tiger sings a song when he's frustrated. And I was like, okay. I was like, yes, this is it, right? The teachable moment. I'm going to turn this around on my kid. I'm going to get him to understand why he needs to listen to me by using Daniel Tiger, since he brought it up. So I was like, okay, Liam, that's great, but I bet you that Daniel Tiger also listens to his parents and drinks his milk with 2 hands. And this little 5 years, a long time ago, he's almost 12 now, but this little 5-year-old boy looks at me in the eyes. He tells me with all sincerity and honesty and no sarcasm, he's like, Dad, Daniel Tiger doesn't drink milk. He drinks human blood. He's a tiger. I was like, I guess that's why his shirt is red, but. All right, you can go away now, Daniel. Man, so needless to say, I didn't have anything else to say. There was no more teachable moments. There was no more. It was like, hey, go get your shoes. We're leaving. But that really is kind of what's happening in this passage of Scripture, what Jesus is doing, right? Our incident was a little bit lower stakes, but Jesus kind of has this comeback for the Pharisees when they think they got him cornered. Verse 17, again, it says, tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar? Then Jesus, a little bit later on, he says, whose image is this on the coin, and whose inscription? Caesar's, they replied. Then he said to them, so give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. And these verses have been used for all kinds of reasons, to make several of them to make political points or arguments, but most of the arguments that I've heard personally have missed the heart of what I believe that Jesus is trying to say in this interaction. Before I kind of get into why, I want us to look at just a little bit of the history and background of this passage so that we can see what's happening. Because the first thing we need to understand is that this interaction between the Pharisees and the Herodians and Jesus was not really spiritual or theological in nature as much as it was politically motivated. And I know, listen, I know no one wants to hear that word right now. We're all waiting for November 6th because that's when the ads in the junk mail stops. My wife and I have like a whole trash can full of just all these mailers. I get it, okay? But I'm not talking about American partisan politics here. I'm talking about the broader scope that the dictionary defines as the activities associated with the governance of a country, especially the debate or conflict among individuals or parties hoping to have or achieve power. Right? So just more this broader, not debates across an aisle, but just like who's in charge. Because if you think that our nation is politically divided right now, and we are, you should have seen the ancient Near East culture that Jesus lived in, because this was a culture where saying the wrong thing about politics would get you not just blocked on Facebook, but literally killed. Right? We got to remember that Jesus lived during a time of Roman military occupation in the nation of Israel. And so it's not just a detail in a story like it is to us. It was their life. Like every day they go out there and there's these reminders all around that they're under occupation of a foreign power. And so the maneuvering for power and influence was constant and rampant in all different aspects of society and life, including the Jewish temple. So when these guys ask Jesus if it's right to pay the imperial tax, they got some ulterior motives which are very politically charged, because the taxes that they're referring to are not just like general income taxes that everybody pays. They are a specific kind of tax that was only levied against people in occupied nations and never on citizens of Rome. And on top of that, paying the tax required a very specific coin called a denarius. Can you show the picture of a denarius? So on the coin, you're going to have the picture of Caesar. And at the time of Jesus, it was Caesar Tiberius. It's kind of a funny looking dude, but whatever, there he is. All right, and then the inscription on that coin would say, Caesar Tiberius, son of the divine Caesar Augustus. And so essentially, these coins were like walking billboards, right, for Caesar, and they're advertising his power and what he would proclaim to be his divinity. And they were designed in part to remind people in occupied nations that Caesar was in charge. And so because of that, paying the tax, this particular tax, was viewed by many people in Jerusalem as acknowledging or accepting or legitimizing the Roman occupation, when most of them just wanted him out. But it was also required by the Roman government. So there's some ramifications to what is happening here. And that's kind of why they asked Jesus the question the way that they did. Because if he says, yes, it's right to pay the tax, he's going to be viewed as a Roman apologist and rejected by the Jewish people, which in their mind is that's going to end his influence and any threat to the power, the Pharisees of the Herodians, to the power of the Pharisees of the Herodians. But if he said, no, it's not right to pay the tax, he could be viewed as a Jewish insurrectionist and arrested, condemned, and eventually executed by the Roman government, thus ending his life and any threat to the power of the Pharisees or the Herodians. All they cared about is they want him gone. No matter how he answered, they thought that they had Jesus in a corner, right? But he mounts a comeback that would make even Jared Goff and the Detroit Lions proud. You know, I had to work that in there somewhere. Okay? He comes from behind. They think we got him down, but he's like, nah, I'm coming back. I'm coming from behind. And he says, show me the coin used for paying the tax. And they brought him a denarius, which we just saw. And he asked them, whose image is this and whose inscription? Caesar's, they replied. Then he said to them, so give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. So by kind of making this point, he's saying, listen, this coin came from Caesar. It belongs to Caesar. Caesar had it made. Caesar's the one who gave it to you. So why are you worried about giving it back to Caesar? It's like, what's the big deal? He's saying it's okay to function in the society in which you exist. It's okay to participate in government. You can be a Christian, be faithful to Christ, and do what's required of you. But then he adds, and to God what is God's. And so if it says, give back to Caesar what is Caesar, then he's kind of naturally saying, but give back to God what is God's. And he's doing at least two things in this statement. The first one, just real quick, is he's being subtly subversive to the occupying Romans. Not doing enough to get himself arrested, but he's kind of throwing his little jabs in there. He's saying, sure, yes, Caesar's the emperor. This coin came from him. Give him the taxes. It's great. But remember that whatever authority or divinity that he claims, there's someone much higher still. So give to God back what is God's, which is, everything. And then he's doing something else. And this is the thing that I want us to really kind of zero in on together this morning. What he's doing is he starts his response by asking again, whose image is on this coin? And he says, okay, it came from Caesar, bears Caesar's image, give it back to Caesar. But Jesus doesn't explicitly say it here, but a lot of theologians believe he's got a hidden question kind of buried within his response. You say, all right, so just kind of imagine with me, hey, this coin has Caesar's image on it. It came from Caesar, so give it back to him if he wants to. But whose image is on you? Right? And anyone present in that audience would have been very familiar with the words of Genesis 1:27, which says, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And so by saying that the coin should be returned to Caesar because it comes from him and bears his image, Jesus is saying that whatever comes from God and bears his image should be given back to him. Namely, all of humanity and the lives that we live. All right, this idea of image is that in ancient times, kings and rulers would declare themselves the image of the gods, right? And it was this way of bestowing on themselves this level of power and authority and kind of uniqueness that was inaccessible to anyone else. But the tradition that Jesus was raised in was completely opposite. Instead of saying one ruler is an image of the gods, it said that every human being bears the image of the one true God. And that tradition, that belief has followed into Christianity. And so that means that we were all created to share in the authority over the earth. We were all designed to create, to cultivate, and to care for the rest of God's good creation. Right? Some of us are aware of that fact, and because we understand that we bear God's image, we strive to imitate God, while others maybe don't understand the significance, and so they unknowingly distort the reflection of God's image that they project into the world. But the fact is that if you have breath in your lungs, whether you're mimicking or mangling, you are mirroring some aspect of who God is. So Jesus is saying that just as quickly as Caesar should be given back the coins that bear his image, God should be given back the lives and devotion of the people that bear his. Jesus is not avoiding the politically charged question that his challengers have asked. He's not like ducking and dodging. What he's actually doing is elevating the conversation and asking them, hey, cool, taxes, that's an interesting conversation, but where does your ultimate allegiance lie? Is it with the Romans? Is it with the Pharisees? Is it with yourselves? Or is it with the God who made you and designed you to bear his image and project his light out into the world? Right? He's inviting them to come back to the God who made them. So what does that look like for us? To give ourselves back to God, to come back to him. Is it just showing up at church a specific number of times? Or is it making sure that we read the Bible a certain number of minutes every day? Or is it something deeper than that? If you imagine with me for a moment just that we're a citizen of ancient Israel and we go to pay this imperial tax. Once that coin is paid, it's gone. Right? We can't go back later and get that coin and spend it on something else. It's not ours anymore. So what if giving our lives back to God as people who bear his image is about something similar? Right? What if it's not just about giving a fraction of our week to God, but our whole selves and our whole hearts? I think that the kind of giving away that Jesus is referring to here is about more than what we do or say, but about who we are, and even more so who we are becoming. I think it's about allowing God to come in and reshape us into the people he has called and created us to be. It's like what Paul wrote in Romans 12, verses 1 and 2, which says in the New Living Translation, "And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind he will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect." So, to me, I think that's what it looks like to come back to God, right? To give ourselves back to him, to let him infiltrate every part of who we are and how we think and what we love. It means to allow him to transform us from the inside out. It means to not just do the right things, but become a more accurate reflection of God's character. Someone who reflects his love and grace and creativity and peace and justice and compassion out into the world around us. And unlike paying taxes, this is not a decision we can make one time and then forget about until next year. Right? It's something we have to decide to do every single day, sometimes multiple times each day. It means constantly checking our desires and our motivations, our actions and intentions, our worldview, our character, and our hearts to make sure that we're striving to imitate God and not elevate ourselves. To give ourselves back to God, to come back to him, means putting his plans over everything else. Our families, our marriages, our jobs, our political affiliations, our bucket lists, our shopping lists, how we spend our time, who we spend our time with, all of it, right? But it also doesn't mean we remove ourselves from any of those things. It doesn't mean we go sit in a corner and only read scripture and sing worship songs for the rest of our lives. It means that we put God at the head and then go out into the world and do all those other things in such a way that points people back to the God who's working in and through us as we strive to imitate him. And the thing is that all this is a whole lot easier said than done, right? And we can see that in the way that the Pharisees respond throughout their interaction with Jesus. I think we can actually see several areas of our lives that we must be willing to surrender if we're going to come back to God and give ourselves back to him. Look at verse 15. It says, "Then the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap him in his words." The word "then" there is really important because this passage of scripture precedes, or actually not precedes, it comes right after 3 consecutive parables that Jesus tells that basically just roast the Pharisees, man. It's like, I have it written down here, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to give you all the stuff that he said. But he basically called these dudes out, called them on the carpet, said, "You are hypocrites. You are not who you say you are." At one point, he said that he's going to the kingdom of heaven will be taken away from them and given to a people who will actually produce its fruit, which means y'all ain't doing none of the stuff you're supposed to be doing. And for people who are so worried about their influence and their image and how people look at them, like this is a really big deal. And so the word, it says, "And then the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap him in his words." I mean, you think? Right? Like if somebody says a whole bunch of stuff to you about you out loud and kind of talks about your character, you're going to do one of two things. You're either going to look in the mirror and say, "Man, that was a really inspired rebuke. Maybe they're right." Or you're going to get angry and then you're going to get even. Right? You're like, "Oh, no." So that's kind of where the Pharisees are. But man, keep our name out your mouth, Jesus. We don't want to talk about that. We don't want to hear about this no more. But their concerns, again, were not so much over whether they were doing the right thing. They weren't really interested at all in what Jesus was saying. What they wanted to do was preserve their power. Because they worried that if Jesus kept talking all that mess, it's going to change the way the people thought of them. So despite being viewed as religious leaders, their motivations had less to do with honoring God and more with maintaining the influence and the power that they had collected for themselves. And so they set in motion a plan to trap Jesus, not because they believed it was right, but because they wanted him gone. It doesn't say, "And then the Pharisees began to seek God's face as to what they should do next." It doesn't say, and then the Pharisees asked God to reveal to them if there was any truth in the words of Jesus that would and bring light to any darkness within their hearts. They didn't have any concern about that at all. They say, nah, this dude's got to go. Because what we want is to keep our power. What we want most is not necessarily to honor God, not necessarily to be obedient to him, not necessarily to be open to maybe some things that we've got wrong. We just want to keep our power and our influences, so this dude has got to go. And when we read about the Pharisees, we judge them. We're like, man, I don't understand what's wrong with those dudes. But the same thing happens to us, right? Maybe we aren't after political power or influence like they were, but we sure do want that promotion. We want to make that sale. We want to win that argument. We want to buy that house. We want to drive that car that we've always wanted. How many of us at one point or another have allowed our desires, as innocent or harmless as they may or may not be, to become a higher priority in our lives than becoming more like Jesus? I know I've done it. I know I have multiple times because it's hard not to. This author, Skye Jethani, he said that he quoted some research that said that the average American is exposed to 150,000 advertisements every single month. Everybody's out to shape and form your desires. Everybody, everything, every company, every corporation, they want to be the thing that you want most. And so they spend all their time and all their money telling you why they are what's most important. Right? We live in a culture that just values hard work and spending too much time on the job. And we're like, man, this is what matters most. And so it's so difficult to not allow the other things in life to become elevated to a higher position. And the other thing I want to say is I'm not saying that we should never desire anything or be motivated to succeed. That's the opposite of what I mean. I believe that collecting things, cultivating environments, or working hard are all really positive ways to reflect God's image into the world around us. They're valuable things that we bring to our lives and our society. What I'm saying is that we all need to do our best to not let our desires and motivations become more important than our desire to imitate Jesus and our motivation to serve God in all we do. Because if we're not careful, our unchecked desires and motivations will trickle down into our actions. Look at verse 16. It says, they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. If you're like me, then the first 20 times you ever read or heard this passage, you're like, okay, and next sentence. That means nothing to me. Because I don't know what a Herodian is. Okay, but the people who were there that day, they did. Right? The audience, they understood that a Herodian was the polar opposite of a Pharisee in political and philosophical thought. If the Pharisees were kind of like separatists, like, no, we don't recognize the rule of Rome. We don't want to be associated with them in any way. We don't want any images of anyone other than God anywhere we go. The Herodians are like, hey, man, Rome's pretty cool. You know, they got roads and stuff. They take care of us. But what we really want is we want our guy Herod to be in charge because Herod kind of lets us do what we want. And so the Herodians were like, they didn't really mind. They just wanted, their whole deal was they just wanted Herod to have his territory expanded. I'm not going to get into all the historical ramifications of that. All you need to know is that a Pharisee on any other day would have said, I will never associate with a Herodian. Because they are opposed to everything that I stand for. I want nothing to do with them. But now when it comes to I need Jesus out of here, the first thing they do is link up with the people they said they would never, ever associate with. So their desires begin to determine their actions. Right? They're so motivated to get rid of Jesus that they do the unthinkable by teaming up with their rivals. They're willing to act in a way outside of who they proclaim to be because they wanted Jesus gone. And again, man, we can read this and we can say, man, what's wrong with those guys? But also we do the exact same thing. You know? How many times have we done or said something we wish we could take back because we were blinded by our desire for whatever we wanted most in that moment? We cut corners, we take shortcuts, we talk about people behind our back, we leave out minor details so we don't get in trouble. We yell at our kids even when we promised ourselves that the last time would be the last time. You know, we all the time do stuff that we wish we hadn't done and say stuff we wish we hadn't said because that's what we wanted in the moment. And so our desires begin to determine our actions. And it doesn't just apply to stuff that we would consider bad, right? I know I'm not the only person here in this room who's gone to bed kind of feeling kind of ashamed because I didn't pray or read my Bible that day, but I somehow found time to watch 16 different YouTube videos and Instagram reels. Like it happens, right? Because the thing is that if we're not intentionally giving God all of ourselves, we end up accidentally giving him our leftovers. And so then these mixed up priorities and messed up behavior, it eventually starts to shape the way we see the world. Verse 17 again, it says, "Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not?" And the way they ask this question, I understand they're trying to set a trap, but the way they ask this question kind of reveals the heart and the worldview of the mindset, rather, and the worldview of the Pharisees. Okay, because they didn't come to Jesus and say, "Hey, Jesus, what are your thoughts on paying the imperial tax?" They didn't say, "Hey, Jesus, can you help us understand what it might look like to be a faithful follower of God and still exist within an occupied Roman government that requires us to pay this imperial tax?" They didn't care what Jesus had to say. They had already decided for themselves that they knew the answer. For them, it was black or white, right or wrong, their way or the highway. They know best. They'd been so foreign by their self-centered desires and actions that they have decided that the universe pretty much revolves around them. They're always right, and if you don't see it the same way as them, then not only are you wrong, but you're from the devil. And I think sometimes we fall into a similar trap when it comes to the way we look at the world. I don't think we use that terminology. I don't think most of us will tell somebody they're from the devil because they don't agree with us. But we sometimes act like it, right? I want to clarify again. There's absolutely some things in life that are absolute truths and they should be non-negotiable for us. And many spiritual truths are at the top of that list. I'm not arguing that we should compromise on things we know to be true in order to accommodate somebody else. That's not what I'm saying today. We should never do that. But what I'm saying is that I think that what happens for some of us is that we elevate all of our opinions to that same level of certainty. Right? And then we forget that people have different backgrounds, different experiences, different stories, and that all of those things impact not only how people see the world, but even how they see and understand the good news of the gospel of Jesus. And when we decide, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, that we're right about everything, we leave no room for humility. And without humility, we're not too far away from beginning to view anyone who holds opinions different from ours as an enemy or an opponent, rather than a fellow image bearer or child of God. Man, our social media inspired debate culture has become so toxic on all sides that we vilify or dehumanize anybody who doesn't see things the exact same way that we do. I saw as an example, I saw a few years ago a YouTube video. I didn't even watch the video. I don't even know what it's about, but I saw the title of the YouTube video, and it says, "Christian professor owns atheist in debate." And listen, I'm all for debating or discussing people who believe differently than you, as long as it's done in good faith. We should do that. I'm all for speaking up about what we believe and telling people the good news of the gospel of Jesus. I think we're commanded to do those things. The thing that kind of bothered me was the word owns. Right? As you know, especially a few years ago, it was a really big word in culture, and it meant like, hey, we have destroyed you in this argument so completely that you should just be embarrassed and ashamed, right? And so it's painting this picture that the Christian professor was, because of who he was and how he was so smart, he embarrassed and ridiculed this atheist professor. And again, what bothers me about that is that we shouldn't be trying to embarrass or annihilate anybody. You know, Jesus didn't come to own people or win arguments. He came to set us free and to share the truth in love. Jesus came to remind us that everyone is deserving of dignity, and that the love and acceptance and forgiveness of God is open and available to anyone, no matter what they may have believed previously. In the last line of his song, Citizens, which is one of my favorite songs, like a singer named John Guerra says, "Love has a million disguises, but winning is simply not one." Here's what I think that means. I love winning. All right? I love it. It's great. This season of groups, we have a couples hangout group at our house every other week, and we didn't mean to do it this way, but we've been playing games, guys versus girls, and the guys are undefeated. I just want to say that. I like winning. I used to get in trouble because I wouldn't let my 6-year-old win at anything. I still don't let him win, actually. You know, my wife was like, "He's just a kid. Let him." No, I ain't going to let him win. He's not going to kindergarten 10. I beat my dad. No, you didn't. I am definitely faster than a 6-year-old. I like winning, right? But what I'm trying to say is that if we focus too much on being right, we will miss opportunities to be light, to shine God's love into darkness all around us. All right? Again, I'm not saying don't tell the truth. I'm not saying don't be honest about what we believe or what we know to be true. I'm saying do it in a way that allows the other people to have dignity, that acknowledges that they, just like you, bear the image of God. You know, and the Pharisees are just not there. They're just like, man, whatever. If you're not like us, then you're not worth anything. And so what happens is that our desires and actions get a hold of our worldview, and the next victim is our character. In verse 18, it says, Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, you hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax. And they brought him a denarius. I love this part of it because I missed it so many times when I first read it. So Jesus, he says, you guys are trying to mess with me. I know you are, but I'm going to get you. I got to come back for you. Listen, give me a coin. Okay? Jesus needs to make a point. He needs to kind of give an object lesson, but he doesn't have the coin he needs. The one that these Pharisees are saying, hey, if you carry this coin around, then you agree with Roman occupation, and you're not a true citizen of Israel. If you are okay with paying this tax, then you're kind of, you're not right. And Jesus is like, I don't have one of these coins. Can y'all bring me one? And who's got one? The people challenging him on whether he should have a coin or not, right? Like they're revealing in this action the very hypocrisy of what they're doing. They're saying, hey, yeah, we got it. We didn't want to, we're trying to trap you to get you to say you should or shouldn't have, but we got it because we're not trying to go to jail for this. Like, yeah, we believe it unless it means we're going to jail. And then we don't. And so they prove kind of their hypocrisy, right? They prove that they are exactly as Jesus has described them. And according to the dictionary and worship team, you can come back now. A hypocrite is a person who acts in contradiction to his or her stated beliefs or feelings. They say one thing and they do another. They tell you they love this thing the most and they show you they love something else entirely. So with that definition, this room has probably got several hypocrites in it. It definitely has one on the stage right now, right? Because we've all behaved in hypocritical ways sometimes. It's part of the brokenness that sin has bestowed upon the world. But if we're not careful to give ourselves back to God every day, then we're going to start to become hypocrites down to the very core of who we are. There's so many people who proclaim Jesus are more concerned with performing their faith than perfecting their faith. I've been there. I'm just going to talk about myself. Man, I've been in seasons where I want to follow all the rules and I want to say all the right things and I want to get, oh man, that guy's such a great Christian. But then I go home and I be who I really am. And I live out and act on the desires, the true desires of my heart, right? The thing is that if we don't give ourselves to God every day, we're going to gravitate towards the shadow of sin in our lives. And if we do this too long, that shadow will seep into our souls and corrupt our hearts. But when we turn to God for strength, he will cultivate within us a new way of living, doing, and being in the world, a way that allows us to glorify God in all we do. All right, that kind of brings us, as we begin to close, to the final piece of themselves that the Pharisees were unwilling to surrender to God, their hearts. All right, look at verse 22. It says, when they heard this, they were amazed, so they left him and went away. So what happens is they think they got Jesus trapped, and he mounts a comeback that was just so harsh they didn't have anything else to say. They were astounded. They were amazed. They were in awe of how wise and discerning and just intelligent and thoughtful and spiritual what Jesus had to say was. They were like overwhelmed with like, man, this guy is good. But instead of allowing any of that truth to get into their hearts, they left him and went away. That's the most heartbreaking part of this whole story for me, because Jesus is holding up a mirror to these guys' hearts. He's showing them that their character has become corrupted, their worldview distorted, their actions ungodly, and their desires disordered. But he doesn't reject them for it. He doesn't say, you know what, man, you guys are so messed up, I don't even want to look at you anymore. Yeah, he calls them out. He says, you're hypocrites. Why are you trying to trap me? But he doesn't do it as a way to embarrass them or shame them or cast them out. He says, this is who you are. This is how you're acting. But listen, give back to God what belongs to God. Come back to him. Surrender your hearts. Let him change you from the inside out. There's still hope for you. Even you, disciples of the Pharisees and Herodians, it's okay. God's love is available to you right now. All you have to do is say, come on, Jesus. Come on, God. I need you. But they left him and went away. Instead of choosing to walk in the truth of God's love as revealed in the person of Jesus, they left him and went away because they were unwilling to surrender their hearts. Proverbs 4:23 says in the New Living Translation, guard your heart above all else, for it will determine the course of your life. So what has your heart, right? What you love, what you desire most, what motivates you, it will determine the actions that you take. And those actions will eventually determine your worldview. And then that worldview work together with your actions and desires to determine your character. And so your heart absolutely does determine the course of your life. But thank you, Jesus, it is not a one-way street. We can turn around. We can change course. We can come back to God and give him back the things that we've been holding on to. And ask him to begin the process of transforming us from the inside out. And so as you stand to your feet this morning, I don't want you to think too long or too hard about the things that you've done. I don't want you to think about, oh man, I remember that one time when I was a hypocrite, or I remember that other time when my worldview was really negative and it impacted someone in a really terrible way. I don't want you to think so much about what we've done, but rather I want us to consider, what will we do next? Will we give back to God what is God's by surrendering our devotion, our commitment, and our hearts? Or will we leave him and go away? Back to where we came from.